My Hero Academia All Grown Up. Chapter 5. When Uraraka entered the office on Monday morning, she could immediately tell that the dynamic was different. Everyone seemed anxious and frazzled. As she entered the briefing room, she observed a silent atmosphere filled with dread. Sitting down in front of Bakugou, she looked nervously between the blonde and Kirishima. "So," she started, "when do the UA students arrive?" Kirishima rubbed his eyes, already feeling the headache coming on. Any minute now. "This is fucking stupid." Bakugou tapped a finger on the table in front of him while he rested his chin in his other hand. A few minutes passed before two people came through the door. Ed Shot, the prolific number 4 hero, was followed by none other than Aizawa. They made their way to the podium and looked out at the group of heroes before them. "Good morning," Ed Shot greeted. "I'd like to begin our meeting with a thank you to UA High School for bringing your students to study at my agency. We take great pride in being a major component in your students' training and providing them with real-world experience." He paused to allow the heroes before him awkwardly nod and clap. "Many of you know Eraserhead from your own studies at UA High. You, most of all, know how important these short internships were to your journey to becoming a pro hero. I expect that you will extend the same level of guidance and temperance that you received in your student days to this new generation of future heroes. You have much to teach them, and they are here to learn." Aizawa took the podium next, with his normal level of underwhelming excitement. "We thank you all for having us here. You will all be working with students from our first-year classes. They are impressionable individuals, so exercise restraint and patience with them as they learn from you. I have no doubts that they will be safe in your hands." Uraraka couldn't help but smile at the familiar face of her former teacher. She'd seen Aizawa many times since high school ended, as she had remained living near the school. All Might still taught there as well, so she and Deku would swing by every so often and run into the monotonously short-tempered teacher on their way to see the former symbol of peace. As the meeting continued, she began to feel some of her excitement returning. She pushed aside all the thoughts that her former classes had instilled in her and decided to focus on having a positive impact on the students. They were there to learn from her, so she was determined to teach until she dropped. As the meeting drew to a close, Etshot took the podium one last time. "We will be assigning you each a student. This student will remain under your supervision at all times. As I am sure you are aware, these students have not acquired provisional licenses, so they are prohibited from providing assistance in the case of a villainous attack. You will patrol with them, advise them, and most importantly, you will provide them with one-on-one training. Make use of the skills you have developed and teach them how to be heroes." The meeting ended and everyone began getting ready to leave. Bakugou leaned over and grabbed his duffel bag from beside his chair and growled about the entire circumstance. "I'm thinking this will be fun." Uraraka smiled sweetly at Kirishima. The redhead patted her on the head and smiled back. "You're so excited now, but get ready to have your soul crushed." Bakugou sniffed at them and turned toward the door. This assignment was only 2 days, and he'd mentored a student last year. He doesn't remember it being particularly hard. It was more pointless than anything. He left the room without a word and headed toward the locker rooms. Once he had his hero costume on, he felt ready to beat a little shit into submission. Last year, he'd gotten a mute. Yes, a mute. So all his intimidation tactics that included any kind of verbal exchange had been rendered obsolete. It was the most annoying shit of his life. He was mildly curious about his student this year. He was sure anything would be better than a mute. He crossed into the training center to see Aizawa standing before a group of students. Some of the other heroes in the agency were already conversing with their assigned students, and Bakugou frowned. "Bakugou," Aizawa greeted as he approached the group. "It's ground zero now." Bakugou spat and clenched his fist. "Which of these shit nerds needs an ass-kicking so bad that you gave them to me?" Aizawa did not look impressed. Oh, believe me, Bakugou. We found you a great match. Great, it's probably another mute. Well, don't just stand there. Bakugou rolled his eyes. I don't have all day. Just as he finished the statement, All Might entered the picture. He still was a gaunt man, but he had aged. Bakugou hadn't seen the former first-rate hero since he graduated, so he tried not to smile at the sudden reunion. Young Bakugou. All Might's eyes lit up with a smile. Look how you've grown. Yeah. Bakugou tried to hold his frown. Maybe you've just shrunk some more, old man. The blonde was not prepared for All Might to suddenly activate the remnant of his quirk into 2 fingers for a surprisingly strong flick to his forehead. Before he could react to it, he was sliding across the floor of the training center on his ass. Damn it, All Might. Bakugou leapt to his feet and glared. What was that for? His red eyes were lit up with intensity, but his lips were twitching to grin. All Might closed the distance between himself at the explosive hero, toting a young girl alongside him. Bakugou, this is Ritsu. She's in the 1A class. Bakugou immediately sized the girl up. She was slender and tall for her age. He could immediately tell that her hair had been dyed black as her roots were blonde. Her hero costume was certainly nothing to call home about. In fact, it wasn't anything more than a t-shirt and jeans. He scowled at her appearance, but she immediately scowled back, crossing her arms defiantly. All Might patted her on the shoulder and looked happily over at Bakugou. She reminded us a lot of you, so we figured you two would be a perfect fit. Bakugou immediately tensed. I don't deal with problem children. I don't deal with problem adults. Ritsu snapped back, surprising her new mentor. Bakugou turned his glare down on her. Shut up, kid. Have fun, you two. All Might shoved the girl forward and turned to walk away. Bakugou gaped at All Might's exit for a moment, but was broken from the thought. What do I even call you, anyway? The girl's voice was laced with malice. Bakugou glared at her. The fuck kind of question is that? I'm ground zero. She smirked right away. Whatever. Bakugou frowned and looked away. He could already tell that this shitstain had a smart mouth and he didn't like it. He was mildly distracted from her as he spotted a bubbly brunette entering the auditorium. She smiled at him briefly before skipping over to see Aizawa. He wanted to smirk back at her, but decided against it. Ritsu stared at him a moment longer. I'm not a shitstain. However, I do have a smart mouth. Visibly irked, Bakugou turned his glare back onto her and narrowed his eyes. Why the fuck would you say that, shitstain? She shrugged. Because I just read your mind. When Uraraka entered the large training room, she immediately noticed Bakugou standing a little ways off with a young girl. They seemed to already be having a little spat, and that didn't surprise her. When the blonde looked up and saw her, she smiled sweetly in hopes that her positivity would keep her coworker from blowing up on the girl. She approached her former homeroom teacher and turned her beam toward him. Mr. Aizawa, I'm so happy to see you. Uravati. Aizawa recognized her with a simple nod of his head. I see you're doing well. Midoriya told me that you had transferred out here. She laughed lightly and pulled on a strand of her hair. Yeah, I figured with Deku in America, now would be the best time to move out here to Tokyo. Aizawa nodded his head again and motioned for her to follow. She smiled again and did as he asked. He led her around the class of students before he stopped and motioned to the student before them. Uravati, meet Yoshio. Aizawa presented a young man with a sleek blue costume. It was not an elaborate costume by any means, but it appeared to have a few quirk-enhancing attributes along the arms and waist. He had casual brown hair and blue eyes, but his expression seemed nonchalant. Hello. Uraraka held her hand out for him to shake with her signature smile. I'm Uravati. It's so nice to meet you. Before she could react, he had spat in his palm and grabbed her hand to shake. As soon as he had grabbed her, she wanted to react and jump away in disgust. However, her body was frozen in place. "Wow, what is this?" she sputtered, trying to will her body to move. Yoshio drew his hand back and smirked. "It's my quirk. My saliva paralyzes people." "Yoshio," Aizawa snapped curtly, "release your quirk or I will take it." He widened his eyes threateningly. The boy rolled his eyes before Uraraka felt the paralysis lift off of her. She immediately stood upright and wiped her hands on her pants. Interesting quirk you have there. We figured you could teach him a thing or two about the need to get close to your target." Aizawa turned back to Uraraka. "Your quirks have that in common." Uraraka forced a light laugh and nodded weakly. "You can count on me." Aizawa nodded back at her and turned away. "It was nice to see you, Uravati." She watched him walk away for a moment before returning her attention to her student. "Well, I only get to have you for 2 days, so I suppose we should get to work." Yoshio stared back at her with a frown but didn't say anything. She wondered briefly if he was typically this stoic. She also made a mental note to keep a close eye on him. If he paralyzed her in a time of crisis, then she wouldn't be able to perform her hero duties, and that could be very dangerous. She led the way out of the training room, glancing one last time at Bakugou. He was still busy quarreling with his student, and it was somewhat comforting to see. At least she wasn't the only one having trouble. Patrol was tense, and Bakugou tried to block it out of his mind. Ever since this stupid greenie had said that she could read minds, he had felt extremely on edge. When he had demanded to know more about her quirk, she'd been exceptionally tight-lipped about it. It was really grating on his nerves. The day was reaching the halfway point as they neared the end of their patrol route. Bakugou was very much looking forward to their training time that afternoon. Perhaps he'd be able to finally exact some revenge on her annoying quirk. "Hey, ground stupid." The greenie's voice tore him away from his pondering. "This is super boring. Are we almost done?" He seethed at her lame excuse for a nickname. "It's Ground Zero, shithead." "Now fucking can it. I didn't say you were allowed to speak." He didn't so much as glance her way once, but instead trudged forward with an annoyed look on his face. "So what? I want to get some training in." She punched her right fist into her left palm. So many thoughts raced through Bakugou's head at that moment. The first thing he wanted to do was pick a fight with the UA teachers for their shit choices. Then, he wanted to do the same thing to Ed Shot. Lastly, he wanted to make this little brat shut the hell up. He doesn't banter with anyone on patrol, let alone speak at all. The only person that he was okay with doing that was Uraraka, and that had been a one-time deal. He wouldn't be caught dead doing that again. "If you tried to pick a fight with the UA teachers, I don't think you'd win," Ritsa stated bluntly and crossed her arms across her chest. Bakugou clenched his jaw tightly and tried to remain composed, but he could feel his patience becoming paper thin. "I picked fights with them all the time in high school. I could kick their asses 10 times over now, stupid kid. Quit reading my mind." She shrugged slightly and smirked. "You just make it too easy. You stupid grown-ups give everything away." "The fuck is that supposed to mean?" Bakugou felt his hands twitch with the urge to blow something up. "You guys don't hide your thoughts at all," she stated in a matter-of-fact tone. "At least my classmates put up a fight. They're smarter than that." Bakugou pondered the consequences of picking a real fight with her at this point. "If you're smart, then you'll shut the hell up. Before you make me?" She finished his thought for him. "Yeah, I already knew you were going to say that, but I also know you aren't serious." The explosive hero snapped his angry red eyes onto her. "Wanna test me, brat?" She immediately backed down, inevitably seeing the shift in his attitude from snarky to serious. "Geez, man, I'm just kidding around." "Get the fuck out of my head." Bakugou spat at her and hurried forward a few paces. "You shouldn't be reading the thoughts of your superiors. It won't get you anywhere but into trouble." She quickened her pace to match his. "Then don't make it so easy." He knew he was reaching his wit's end. He hustled forward in silence and tried to think of something to relax him. Perhaps he would be able to find something to annihilate when they got back to the training room. It had been a while since he'd gotten the opportunity to blow something to smithereens. He led his young patrol partner around a corner and immediately recognized the place. Only a few days ago, he had watched Uraraka take down that petty thief in this very spot. He mused for a moment as he recalled it. She'd taken that guy down like a badass on a mission. He'd gotten such a kick out of it that he no longer felt bitter about her stealing the arrest. "You have a habit of giving people nicknames," Ritsa started again. "You think about Roundface a lot. Who is she?" Bakugou was completely taken off guard by her question. He stopped in his tracks and worked up the most intense glare he could give. "That is none of your business, brat." She didn't shrink back at all when faced with his glowering gaze. Fair enough. She crossed her arms and glared back. "I'm losing sight of your thoughts anyway, so I'll just have to wait to find out." The blonde didn't know if he should be riled up or relieved. It was killing him that he couldn't quite figure out how her quirk worked yet. It was an even bigger problem that she wouldn't tell him. It was annoying as all hell. "Don't mention that name around me again." Bakugou finally spat out at her before he rushed to complete their patrol. Why he felt so defensive about it, he didn't know. All he knew was that he didn't want to talk about it, especially to a first-year high school student. Uraraka wasn't anything special, and there is no way he thought about her enough to warrant any questions. The patrol ended in silence when they'd finally arrived back at the agency. As they got inside, he gruffly instructed her to meet him in the training room. He needed to take care of some business first. He burst into the conference room with a fiery purpose, but was only met by Ed Shot. "Where are those bastards?" The question came out as a snarl. The pro-hero leaned back in his chair, taking his gaze away from the documents in front of him. "They've gone to monitor the activities of their students." "Speaking of, where is yours?" "Doesn't matter," Bakugou snapped. "I need to talk to them now." Ed Shot laid his pen down on the table and sighed. "I don't have time for this right now, and neither do you. You have been given a duty, so go and do it." Bakugou fumed with irritation. "Not until someone tells me how the brat's quirk works." "Ground zero," Ed Shot replied sternly. "You are a pro-hero. Figure it out." The blonde scoffed but shut up. He pondered arguing further, but instead opted to leave and slam the door behind him. Damn it, his day was going to shit fast. Bakugou's one-on-one training was not going well at all. He was hardly keeping his patience intact as he tried to help Ritsu learn how to fight. She'd adopted his mannerism for nicknames, and he was constantly having to correct her. It was wearing on his stability. Her quirk didn't do much for her other than allow her to dodge. Her attacks were miscalculated and a mess. He figured she'd be at an advantage from the get-go, but she still hadn't been able to land anything concrete on him yet. He was slowly realizing that she needed more hand-to-hand combat training. It was infuriating to try and teach her, though. Her fighting style was a far cry from his, and he was struggling to find something that would suit her abilities. She wasn't bulky, heavy, or strong, so she lacked the ability to overpower an opponent with brute force alone. Her other problem was that her quirk didn't allow her much protection either. Although she could read his attacks before he performed them, she wasn't always fast enough to get away. They'd been at it all afternoon, and he felt like he hadn't gotten anywhere. She was shit at listening and even worse at trying to mimic the approaches he had taught her. He felt like he had done nothing but beat up on a child by the end of it. He glowered at everyone as the day finally ended and he left the office. He hadn't been in this bad of a mood in a long time. He couldn't wait to get back to his place and finally work on forgetting this stupid as hell day. "Yo, Bakugou." Kirishima's voice called. "Wait up, man." This was exactly what he didn't need. Kirishima's stupid face wouldn't do anything but piss him off more. "Get lost, shithead." The redhead ignored the comment as he jogged up next to Bakugou. Hey dude, how did it go with the mind reader? Fuck off, Kirishima. Bakugou sneered and hoped it would scare him off. That bad? Kirishima teased and cackled. Kazue and I are actually doing really well together. That kid has spunk, let me tell you. Bakugou really didn't want to hear about how great of a day Kirishima had. Knowing the stupid redhead was going to rub it in, Bakugou tossed over a threatening look. Shut the hell up, dipshit. I don't have time for this. I saw you guys in the training room. Kirishima didn't hesitate. I have to say, I'm so glad I'm not you. The urge to strangle that shithead was so severe that Bakugou's hand twitched. Well, it would be fucking great if I knew how that brat's quirk worked. Kirishima hummed with recognition. So you don't know how she activates it, huh? Fuck no I don't. Bakugou clenched his fists. It's goddamn annoying. She's fucking lucky that she's a kid, otherwise it wouldn't matter. Kirishima tapped his chin. Is it possible she can read minds all the time? That would be so helpful. I'm actually kind of jealous. No. Bakugou shook his head angrily. She can only do it sometimes, but I can't figure out how. Well, Kirishima clapped Bakugou on the back roughly. I'm sure a smart guy like you can figure it out. Bakugou shoved the redhead away from him. Piss off. I'm leaving. Don't blow anything up on your way home. Kirishima teased and waved a farewell. The blonde marched away and Kirishima could practically see the fumes of irritation radiating off him. He chuckled to himself at Bakugou's predicament and once again felt thankful for the student he'd been paired with. He supposed he was fortunate for getting a fun kid that likes to mess around as much as he does. When Bakugou finally disappeared into the rush hour crowd, Kirishima mused to himself about the secret he was sitting on. It had been a few days since they'd all gone out drinking, and he wondered if Bakugou would ever fess up to leaving with Uraraka. Kirishima wasn't blind. He was also aware that Bakugou still hadn't realized that he was starting to crush on the brunette. It was almost comical to the redhead. Bakugou always spent so much time telling him that he was the stupid one, but this time Kirishima felt like the roles were reversed. He recalled the previous Friday night. When Bakugou had insisted that he was leaving, Kirishima had let him. However, a few minutes after the blonde had left, Kirishima noticed that another member of their party was also missing. He'd abruptly abandoned his pool game and wandered over to the door of the bar, curiosity piquing his interest. When he glanced through the glass on the door, he spotted Uraraka turning away from it and pouting. She was talking to someone just out of his line of sight. He dared to creep closer, hoping to catch a glimpse of the other person. He watched as Uraraka had become flustered, and she seemed to huff and puff about something. Finally, she seemed to find the words she wanted to say and went to lean on the wall. Kirishima urgently wanted to know what they were saying. He figured that the only person she could be talking to was his hot-blooded friend, and if he wasn't mistaken, he'd say they appeared flirty. He waited at the door for a few more minutes, hoping to see more than just the wall they were clearly hiding behind. Eventually, he saw Uraraka appear again. She played with the suspenders on her shorts while she talked and swayed back and forth unknowingly. She broke out into a goofy smile for a moment before frowning. At this point, he was sure it was Bakugou that she was talking to. But before he could confirm it, she was walking away. He waited a few minutes before going to peek outside. He hadn't noticed Mina come up to stand beside him, and she demanded to know what he was doing. When he began to explain, she shut him up and insisted that he leave them alone. She also was quick to point out that Uraraka was spoken for, so it really wasn't any of his business anyway. Kirishima had spent the rest of the weekend trying not to bother Bakugou. He was dying of curiosity, but he didn't want to push it. If he got involved in his blonde friend's business too quickly, he was sure that Bakugou would wall him out. He certainly didn't want to scare the blonde away from his first crush either. It was a delicate situation, So Kirishima had decided to leave it alone. He just hoped that Bakugou would come to him first when he realized his own feelings. Uraraka dumped her load of dirty clothes into one of the many machines at the laundromat and sighed with relief. She usually did her laundry on Sundays, but she'd spent the entire day unpacking the last of her boxes in her apartment. She felt happy that she was finally getting close to finishing her move. She dumped some detergent in and began the wash cycle before turning to find a place to sit. She'd picked up a new book and was excited to start on it. As she wandered across the laundromat, she couldn't help but notice a tuft of ashen hair sticking out from behind a row of washing machines. She would recognize those spikes anywhere. Rounding the corner, her suspicions were confirmed. Bakugou was seated in the line of chairs, playing with his phone. He seemed uncharacteristically casual. He had sports shorts on and a plain red t-shirt. His laundry basket sat empty at his feet aside from the bottle of detergent and a box of dryer sheets. When she approached him, his eyes snapped up to see her. He looked surprised for a moment, but his mouth just a quickie turned to a frown. "The hell are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same thing, but isn't it obvious?" She lifted her own basket up a little bit to emphasize. He didn't change his attitude. "No shit, round face. I meant, why are you at this laundromat?" She shrugged and padded over to him. "It's the only one around here that takes cash." He stiffened as she sat down beside him. "Of course it fucking is." She dropped her basket down beside his and leaned back in her chair. "Well, at least I have some company now." "I prefer silence," he grumbled and turned his attention back to his phone. "Of course you do," she quipped and waved her book around. "I have a book to read anyway, so I guess you're in luck." She plopped it down on her lap and flipped it open to begin reading. It was quiet for a few minutes and Bakugou finally turned to see what book she was reading. As she flipped the page, he caught sight of the cover. A romance. "Really, round face? I guess I shouldn't be surprised you'd like that sappy shit." She looked slightly offended. "I am a girl, you know." She shut the book and turned her attention onto him. "If it's so dumb, then what do you read for fun?" He narrowed his eyes to glare at her. "Battle strategy, quirk extension guides, all the other books that a pro should be reading." She rolled her eyes. "That doesn't sound fun to read." "Okay then, what's your favorite book?" She paused to think. "More specifically, what's your favorite fiction book?" He didn't budge on his glare, but he did appear to think about it for a moment. "Like I'd tell you. It's none of your damn business." "Well, we are stuck here, aren't we?" She gestured to the laundromat around them. "You might as well share." He began to be suspicious of her right away. Was she stealing some tips from Kirishima's Book of Annoyances? A Game of Thrones. Happy. She seemed to weigh his answer in her head for a few minutes. "I guess it makes sense. I didn't peg you for a fantasy guy, but now that I think about it," she trailed off as she thought about it further. "Don't overanalyze that shit, round face." He finally looked away from her and back down at his phone game. She smiled slightly and leaned forward in her chair. "My favorite book is Pride and Prejudice. It's such a beautiful story." "Figures," Bakugou scoffed. "Deku is just a regular Mr. Darcy, isn't he?" Uraraka's expression turned puzzled. "He's nothing like Mr. Darcy." Just as she finished her statement, she jumped to a look of surprise. "You've read Pride and Prejudice?" Bakugou kicked himself. "It's a fucking classic. Blame my mother. That old hag made me read it." "Don't pretend like you didn't love it," she teased and sat back again. "How did your day go?" Bakugou clenched his jaw at the question. "For fuck's sake, what did Kirishima blab to you?" She raised her eyebrows at him questioningly. "Nothing. I haven't talked to Kirishima today." "What happened?" Bakugou kicked himself again. How did he always set himself up for shit like this? That shitstain can read my damn mind. She doesn't know shit about hand-to-hand combat either. It's fucking annoying. This is why greenies suck. She muffled her laughter. Well, at least I'm not the only one having trouble. He gave her a questioning look. You finally get it now, don't you, round face? Do I? She giggled. Yoshio doesn't do anything I ask him to do. I'm worried that all he wants to do is look for the next opportunity to spit on me. Spit on you? Bakugou's face wrinkled with disgust. Why the hell would he do that? It paralyzes you. She stated and noted that his expression didn't change. Yeah, I know. It's super gross. That's fucking disgusting. Bakugou looked away. It sounds like that kid needs a real ass-kicking. He's lucky he didn't get me. Uraraka chuckled again and ruffled the pages of the book in her hands. It sounds like your kid needs someone to teach her some actual hand-to-hand combat too. I'm surprised that they didn't assign her to me. I'm great at teaching stuff like that. I pity her for having to learn it from you. Is that supposed to be an insult, round face? Bakugou snapped and gave her a threatening look. It's not an insult if it's the truth. Uraraka met the challenge his eyes presented. Bakugou felt a smirk twitching at his lips. She'd developed a much smarter mouth since high school and he liked it. I'm fucking great at teaching people how to fight. I'm a damn good fighter. Just because you're great at something doesn't mean you're great at teaching it. She said the words without thinking about it, but it sprouted an idea in her brain. Hang on. She sat up suddenly and smiled. You're bad at teaching someone how to fight, and I'm bad at giving discipline. Bakugou paused as she worked out the thoughts in her mind. Yes, so? Trade me for a few hours tomorrow, she smiled at him. I'll teach Ritsu how to fight, and you can discipline Yoshio. That way, they're getting what they came for, and we're getting what we need. He pondered her words for a few minutes and ran a hand through his hair. It was a damn good idea. He had to hand that to her. But was he ready to admit that? He wasn't so sure. Fuck no. Come on. Uraraka pleaded. I could really use your help, and in return, I'll help you. He liked the fact that she needed his help, but he figured he could milk it for a while longer. Quit thinking that I can't teach. By the time I'm done with her, she'll be the best damn fighter in the whole school. Don't push it, Bakugou. She frowned at him. I'll only ask you to help one more time. I can handle Ritsu. Bakugou felt the smirk that had been playing on his lips finally emerge. Fine, but I'm only doing this because you need me to deal out an ass whooping. I wouldn't do it without that. Deal. She smiled and held out a hand for him to shake. He looked at her hand and decided he'd snub her. Now shut the hell up and read your shitty-ass book. I'm tired of hearing your voice. She frowned but dropped her hand. Well, I'm tired of hearing yours. She smiled to herself as she propped her book open again on her lap. She couldn't help but feel an elation at their banter. It felt good to just kid around with someone again. So that's it for today. If you liked the video, leave a like, subscribe, and activate the notification bell. And if you want to contribute to the entire story being illustrated, just read the information in the description below.